Hello, everybody, and welcome to Commodity Culture, where our goal is to make you a better investor in the commodities sector. My name is Jesse Day, and on this episode, I'm very excited to welcome Alex Krainer to the show, an author, market analyst, researcher, trader, and hedge fund manager, and the creator of iSystem Trend Following. We're going to focus on geopolitics today and discuss Trump's flurry of threats to nations around the world, including telling Putin that he'd better end the war or more sanctions are incoming, the dire economic situation faced by the UK, and why Ray Dalio is saying they're entering a debt-death spiral, his take on what's truly behind the Israel-Hamas conflict, where he sees it headed, and so much more. This was a fantastic conversation. You guys are going to love it, so strap yourselves in for Alex Krainer. Alex Krainer, great to have you back on the show. I want to kick the show off with a question I ask every guest, but since today we're going to be focusing a little bit more on geopolitics, I'm going to go there as opposed to financial markets. So I'm going to ask you, what are the main themes and trends you're watching right now when it comes to politics and geopolitics that you think more investors should be paying attention to?
I think it should definitely be the coming collapse of Great Britain. Because, this is something that I've been observing from 2021, from the time when the United States left Afghanistan, from the withdrawal. And what kind of triggered my attention to that was that in the United States, there were reactions to the way the withdrawal was conducted, but by far the most hysterical reaction was among the British political class. And I thought, what is this all about? I mean, aren't the Brits like the reluctant junior partners who follow the United States on all these imperial misadventures out of sheer loyalty? Shouldn't there be relief that this is finally over after 20 years? And instead they were actually lambasting the United States, not because of the way they conducted the withdrawal, but that they were withdrawing to begin with. And then I thought, okay, well, it looks like they are more involved and more exposed there than we knew. And I looked into it a little bit, and I wrote an article titled "The Fall of Global Britain: An Investment Hypothesis." And basically, I've been paying attention a little bit to Great Britain, which is not easy given how much stuff is going on. You look at this a little bit, and Britain has been one of the things that I've been paying attention to, and already back in 2021, I made a prediction that the unraveling of this British crisis would involve a collapse of the British pound, a collapse of the gilt in terms of price, rise in interest rates in England, and probably a continued bull market in the FTSE 100. And so far, all three have happened. Now, I have to qualify it. When I say collapse, I don't mean overnight, just the whole thing tanking, losing 50%. But perhaps a gradual unraveling, which then at certain point in time, which nobody could predict when that is, hits an inflection point, when the critical mass of all the market participants realize, oh my God, things are really, really bad, and they just want to bail out. And then you have that accelerated crash, which still hasn't happened, which will hit probably both gilt and the pound. And what typically tends to happen in this type of crisis is that you have the central bank, which is obliged to resort to printing presses because there's nothing left to there's no other solution to the crisis, and then they flood the system with liquidity. And as they do so, most of this liquidity ends up going into the stock market. And then you'll get the stock market go almost vertical, because what's happening is people lose confidence in the currency and they want to be rid of it as soon as they can. And they reckon, I need to acquire real assets. So that's why money ends up going into the stock market. And I updated this hypothesis over the last few months. So I published another piece in August last year, 2024, and then I published another one just a few days ago. And now I've seen that it's picking up. Ray Dalio recently gave an interview to Financial Times in which he said, well, as things stand, Britain is risking a debt death spiral. Those three words, I'm not sure in which order. Debt death spiral. And then just yesterday, Michael Burry of the Great Short fame also picked up on that, and he posted a pretty scathing thread on X. So I think that maybe we're coming to the point where markets are starting to realize and pay attention, and it's the financial equivalent of predators smelling blood. We could be hitting a feeding frenzy, which we could see attack on the pound and on the gilt, and Great Britain pretty much going down the road of the Roman Empire.
Hey guys, just a quick break to hear from today's sponsor, ARC, Silver Gold Osmium. They offer personalized service and competitive prices with no minimum purchase for silver, gold, platinum, or osmium. Here's just some of the comments left on this YouTube channel about ARC SGO and owner Ian Everard. Have bought from ARC, good source and price. I cannot say enough good about Ian and his company. He is the most honest individual I could find in order to buy precious metals. If you are looking to buy precious metals, I recommend Ian at ARC Silver. He is a straight shooter. So go to arcsgo.com and contact Ian Everard today at 307-264-9441 or by email at ian@arcsgo.com. And make sure to tell him that Commodity Culture sent you. Well, another thing about the UK, because in one of your recent Substack posts, you highlighted that there's a proposal for an entity to clear US Treasury futures at the London clearinghouse overseen by the Bank of England. Talk to us about how this came to light and what its implications could be.
Well, this was a few days ago when they held confirmation hearings at the U.S. Senate for Trump's nominee as a Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent. And he was being questioned by Senator Cornyn of Texas. And Cornyn dropped the hint that basically he said something like, there's a proposal to shift the clearing of U.S. Treasury futures to an entity based in the UK, a London-based entity that would be under control of the Bank of England. And Scott Bessent didn't know anything about this, and he said, well, thank you for bringing this to my attention. I don't know, but I'll look into it and we'll report back. And then I wrote an article about it, and then, as usually happens, which is phenomenal on Substack, is that you have very intelligent readers who, many of them know something, and then they alerted me in the comments to a couple of Bloomberg articles in September and November of last year, 24, and this got started pretty much at the same time as the Fed moved from using LIBOR, London Interbank Offer Rate, to using SOFR, Secured Overnight Funding Rate, right? LIBOR, so basically through LIBOR, the price of money in the United States was being set in London, which is insane. I don't know why it took so long for that to change, but basically, under Jerome Powell, the Fed cut that link and created SOFR. And then as the United States moved from LIBOR to SOFR, this initiative started to, well, hey, okay, fine, let's then go trade American Treasury futures through a Bank of England controlled entity in London. I thought that's really weird because I wasn't sure exactly how to interpret that, and I asked around, and it's very, very murky. You know, there's a lot of smart interpretations, but basically, you know, it reminded me of a book that I read a few months ago called The Great Red Dragon, which was written by one L.B. Woolfolk, and who was kind of chronicling the way British financial interests took over the choice assets in the American economy through the 19th century. And among other things, they would create these boards of trade, again, like clearinghouses, which ended up setting the price for produce for the farmers. And then, as a rule, these boards of trade the effect was that they ended up depressing the prices of produce, you know, whatever, corn, sunflower, wheat, whatever whatever the crop was in question. And that would drive farmers into bankruptcy wholesale. And then they would end up buying the best quality agricultural fertile land across the United States for pennies on the dollar because the farmers were in distress. And so people noticed, because sometimes the price moves didn't make any sense. You know, maybe the crop would come up short, but the price would nevertheless go down. And so people said, this is manipulated. This isn't right at all. And so L.B. Woolfolk documented all this, you know, and he went around the country holding presentations and lectures. You know, if he were alive today, he'd probably be a podcaster. But back then, he went just from city to city and talked about all this and collected news articles, and he collected testimonies from the people who he talked to, because, you know, many people would come to his presentations and then they would tell him, well, hey, you know, this happened, guess what? And so this all leads straight to London, because even the US bankers themselves would tell him, you know, when we make investments anywhere around the country, they said that the money line goes to the East Coast, to Wall Street, but from Wall Street, it goes to London. So the money is always coming from London. And then elsewhere, I also read that was, you know, another source. I forget which one exactly now, but it corroborated. And apparently what was going on is that the London bankers were plundering India, taking massive amounts of gold from India. And then they used this gold to basically buy up the United States economy. And so they took over agricultural land and all the strategic industries, including steel industry, oil industry, construction, all the major cities. They took up, you know, the business centers, the city centers, finance, and retail, wholesale and retail trade. And, you know, this this initiative of now all of a sudden U.S. Treasuries clearing through London, I thought that doesn't sound right. Why? Why should they? What's the upside? What's the interest? Why should that happen? And then also, what I found out is that that there was a group. The people who are involved with this was Howard Lutnick of Cantor Fitzgerald. So he was apparently spearheading this initiative and creating this exchange, which would, I think, be located in the United States. But the clear, when you trade securities, your broker can be in the United States, but your clearing agent can be somewhere else. So the broker would be in the United States, and the collateral would be in the United States. Meaning, by collateral, I mean the margin that the traders post on the futures exchange. So that's going to be usually some small percentage of the nominal amount. So I don't know, if you want to trade $100,000 worth of Treasury futures, you probably have to post $2,000, $3,000, or $5,000 as margin in cash. So that money sits with the broker on the broker's account, and that broker's account is with some major bank usually, and you don't necessarily know which one. Well, apparently, as Lutnick was lobbying for this to happen, they were also working on a new set of rules that would allow the broker and the clearinghouse to invest the collateral in sovereign debt of a number of countries like Japan, Canada. There was a list of all these, Western countries, and the UK and Great Britain. And so I thought, oh, okay, because the UK is desperately strapped for cash. So the October 30th, the last budget of the Keir Starmer cabinet had something like 36 billion pounds of unfunded spending programs. And they were fully counting on capital markets to finance this, to buy the British gilts, and to provide, to lend the money to the British government for this. And apparently that's not going so well. The markets are not exactly delighted. The gilts interest rate hit, I think, something like 16-year high in December or thereabouts last year. And so it seems to me that this was also an attempt to corner the collateral of the exchange clearinghouse to basically unwittingly fund the British government because they're strapped for cash badly. And I don't know. Bank of England has also very different rehypothecation rules. So I don't know how it works, how the plumbing is laid out, but it seems to me that if the cash held by the clearinghouse or the broker is recycled into British gilts, so now you have that security which is deemed low risk or no risk, that maybe you can use those securities if they're newly issued to hold those as collaterals for other types of transactions. So you can create a whole inverted pyramid with these funds, and then create a whole lot of funding for whatever net zero projects, war in Ukraine, God knows what else. And so I thought that was extremely interesting, and it was also extremely interesting because this is a major deal. The United States has never done this. This is completely unprecedented. Even allowing a clearinghouse in some other countries with some other regulator and other regulation enforcement agencies to clear American treasuries, the futures, and no other major country does this. So, this was to my mind, a financial pirate raid, in fact, by the British interest. Okay, so Howard Lutnick is not a British man, but okay, whatever. He's connected in all those how do you call them, vested interest networks. And then also interestingly, Howard Lutnick is allegedly Donald Trump's number one ally on Wall Street. So I think that they were trying to seduce Trump and the Trump team into being friendly with them and allowing them, because this stuff is so obscure that back in August, Senator Dick Durbin wrote a letter to the head of the CFTC and said, please explain this to me. What are the implications of this? Why is this being done? And by 3 months later, there was still no answer. They still didn't provide an answer. So it's an extremely murky story. But let's say that what is clear is that it's potentially hugely beneficial to the United Kingdom. There's no benefit to the United States from the arrangement, and I think that it also allows the Bank of England to destabilize economically the United States. Let's say to drive interest rates higher, to drive down the price of the American debt, in case they want to weaken Donald Trump and sabotage his presidency. So it's like a whole minefield.
Well, speaking of Donald Trump, I wanted to touch on his inauguration and the fact that he's been signing a flurry of executive orders in the lead up to his presidency. He's also been verbally threatening nations around the world economically. The BRICS, if you try to operate outside the US dollar, you'll get a 100% tariff. He's been talking about China. He's even been talking about putting sanctions on Canada, which looks like might actually happen, Mexico. But interestingly, he posted recently on Truth Social that Putin had better make a deal to end the Ukraine war, or he's going to put even more sanctions and he's going to put tariffs on Russia. Now, Trump campaigned on ending the Russia-Ukraine war on day one. Surely his plan can't be to threaten Putin over social media. What do you make of all of this?
Well, it doesn't seem to me that the Trump statements were aimed at Russia. They were aimed at domestic political class. I'm pretty convinced of that because the statements are almost incoherent. And I think that the reason they appear incoherent is because they don't mention the most important part about them. There was the kind of a longish paragraph on Truth Social, and there was also a part of the statement that he gave to the journalist when he was doing his signing of the executive orders. And first of all, he made a very glaring error in his statement on Truth Social that the Russians lost 60 million, that they had 60 million casualties during World War II. The real number is 16, not 60. So the whole Soviet Union was 27 million. Russia, 16 million of those 27 was Russia. So he exaggerated it by a factor of 4 more than that, right? No, a little bit less than that. Sorry, math. But nevertheless, it's a huge mistake, which I wonder, is it a typo or is it deliberate? A message all over the place for some reason. And based on the experience of his first 4 years in office, I'm not inclined to think that it's a typo. I think that there's something deliberate about the way he formulates his messaging. And then in the oral part of his statement about this, he said, well, if I was in the office, that war never would have happened, which I think is true. And then he said, Putin didn't respect Biden. And so he kind of framed it as though it was a question of respect, that Putin would have been too afraid of Trump to put his grubby hands on Ukraine. But with Biden in office, he thought like, hey, what the hell? But that's not at all what happened. What happened was that Donald Trump in his first term, when he met with Vladimir Zelensky in 2019, he told Vladimir Zelensky in no uncertain terms that he had to implement the Minsk II agreements. The agreement that was reached between the East Ukrainian breakaway regions and Kiev government, and guaranteed by Germany and France, by Angela Merkel and Francois Hollande. And so they were supposed to, end the war. They were supposed to negotiate directly, resolve the problems, the eastern regions, the breakaway regions, while staying part of Ukraine, were supposed to get certain, autonomies, and their rights to speak the Russian language had to be recognized, and so on and so forth. So Trump told Zelensky, you have to implement the Minsk agreement. That's what we expect of you. And I remember the body language when Zelensky went to meet. His face was pale. He was clearly distressed. And then everything changed almost from the day Joe Biden walked into the Oval Office. And on day 12 of Biden's term in office, he called Zelensky. And the very next day, Zelensky outlawed the biggest political opposition party, led by one of the Ukraine's oligarch named Viktor Medvedchuk. And he also took 3 opposition television stations off air, almost effective immediately. And, the neocons in the White House were jubilant. And they were saying how, Zelensky is a doer, he got things done. We didn't think he would, but he got things done. So they were very, very happy. And there was this half joke that taking those television stations off the air was Zelensky's inauguration gift to Joe Biden. And then 2 weeks later, what happened was that Zelensky arrested Viktor Medvedchuk, actually, and they took all his properties away from him. They confiscated all his assets. And among his assets was a pharmaceutical company. And this pharmaceutical company had just secured the contract to produce, the shot, and distribute it to Ukrainian people. And so once they arrested Medvedchuk and took away his pharmaceutical company, they tore up this contract and made Ukraine a monopoly of Western pharmaceutical companies. So, it wasn't a question of Vladimir Putin, and from that point on, the relations between Russia and Ukraine only escalated farther and farther towards war. And then practically almost within a year, we had the actual hot war breakout between Russia and Ukraine. Very deliberately, there was no effort made by Biden administration uh, to reduce tensions, to try to find a peaceful arrangement. No talk about the Minsk agreements anymore. So anyway, Trump knows all this perfectly well. And he said that I had a deal with Putin. He said I had a firm deal with Putin. The deal wasn't you respect me and you don't touch Ukraine. The deal was Ukraine has to implement the Minsk agreements. And the war was practically imposed on Russia. It was contrary to what some people still talk about. It was very much provoked. And so it wasn't at all a question of Vladimir Putin having respect for Trump, but having no respect for Biden. It was about something else. And this something else, Trump is perfectly aware of. So the reason why he formulates his statements the way he does, to my mind, by omitting the most important element in that, they seem incoherent. They seem like they don't make sense. Well, I know for a fact that he knows what the real state of affairs is, because he himself told Zelensky, you must implement the Minsk agreements. So my conclusion is that statement wasn't at all meant for the Russians. The statement was addressed to directed at the American, a segment of the American political class. So, maybe to give them the impression, oh, I'm all tough and Vladimir Putin's afraid of me and I got all this under control, which is not the way things are. And, all this talk about sanctions and tariffs and blah, blah, blah. Russia has already been under the world's harshest sanctions ever imposed on any nation in the history of the universe for the last 3 years. They're winning the war. Their economy is doing really well. They have a small controllable problem of inflation, but their economy is going well. The country is, and you don't have to believe me. There's a lot of people reporting from Russia that things are going really, really well. And so, what could Trump possibly do in terms of sanctions and tariffs and whatever else? The answer is next to nothing. He can, whatever he does to Russia is going to boomerang back and be much more harmful to the United States. So I don't know, long story short, it was a statement for domestic audience. And I think that the deal the reality of what he did is that he froze all foreign aid except for Egypt, Jordan, and Israel for 90 days. This is practically a death sentence for Ukraine. So it's important, this actually makes an impact, whereas his threats and his tough posturing doesn't make any impact at all. It's nothing. It's just entertainment for the home crowd.
So is Trump's freezing of foreign aid perhaps behind that? He's making an effort to bring the war to an end. Do you think that's what's going on? And when do you think we'll see a resolution here? Because it's been, since the very beginning of the war, obviously you had a lot of talk about how Russia would easily defeat Ukraine. I think people thought that was going to happen much quicker than more of a slow grinding war than it has been. I've spoken to other people who have said that, this is part of Russia's strategy. They're playing the long game. So what are your thoughts on both Trump halting foreign aid? Is he trying to end things that way? And how do you see this coming to a resolution?
Yeah, I think that the freezing of foreign aid is he's actually lending a helping hand to the Russians, and he's giving the Ukrainians a signal that they need to sit at a negotiating table and stop fighting, because this is, they're just shoving thousands and thousands and thousands of young men into the meat grinder for no good reason. They're already defeated, and so he's forcing an end to it. So I think that matters greatly. And I think that that's a signal both to the Russians, okay, get it over with, and to the Ukrainians, stand down, surrender, it's over, game over. Don't waste any more lives on this. Which, to my mind, is a very, very positive thing. And maybe this is also the reason for the tough posturing, because a lot of people in the West are going to be very bitterly disappointed with this, because they're making a lot of money off of this war. Certain political options are open to them for as long as the war is going on, and so forth. And now, he's taking that away from them, and there are going to be a lot of people who are going to be very, very angry. So maybe to compensate that a little bit, he has to also project certain toughness, and he's gonna punish Vladimir Putin if he misbehaves, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, that makes sense. I want to switch to the conflict in the Middle East for a moment, because Netanyahu recently said Trump emphasized to him that the current ceasefire is temporary and Israel will have full backing to resume the war in Gaza. I wonder what your thoughts are there, and also what is really at the heart of that conflict. Why is it happening? Obviously, we know the history in the region, but at the time being, it's so interesting how the participants on social media and various media sources are kind of divided down the middle, with supporting one side or the other, but you don't hear any voice in the middle that's saying maybe they're both barbaric in some way or another, as opposed to one side's this barbarous evil force that kills children and the other side is just trying to save people and help everybody. It seems that you've got people on one side or the other. So why do you think there's that polarization? What do you make of Netanyahu's comments, and what are your thoughts on the conflict overall?
The conflict itself is the conflict that goes back to 1948. And it wasn't so long ago that the Palestinians attempted to resist the occupation peacefully. So, they would gather in front of the concentration camp, barbed wires and gates, completely unarmed, to protest, and the response of the Israeli Defense Force to bring snipers to shoot them through the kneecaps and through their heads, and so what do you do? The Palestinians had a choice of maybe continuing to die in captivity silently, so that they don't ruin they don't inconvenience us and ruin our mood with their suffering, or to fight back, which unfortunately, inevitably entailed violence. So that's what happened. As far as October 7th goes, I'm convinced that was a false flag attack. That is, that it was orchestrated with the Hamas leadership, not the Hamas leadership in Gaza, but the Hamas leadership in Qatar. And the fact that it was a false flag is almost, very, very hard to argue with once you know all the facts. And this is what I think the majority of Israelis also believe, and definitely a large number of people in the Israeli Defense Forces and their security apparatus. Now, there's a perception in the West that Donald Trump is a diehard Zionist, devoted to Israel and Israel's defense. But I think that even if that were true, which I'm not sure that it is really, the reason why in Western politics you have to be a Zionist, because otherwise they just destroy you, which, we saw what happened to Jeremy Corbyn in the UK, just for having a kind of a balanced position on the issue, and saying that there has to be a viable Palestinian state. Well, they demonized him as a as an anti-Semite, and they almost completely disenfranchised him from politics. So I don't know to what extent Donald Trump is really such a passionate Zionist. And you can have sympathy for Jewish people and not be Zionist at the same time, and you can have many friends among the Jews, as Donald Trump does, without being a Zionist, and so forth. And then there's also a perception that he's very chummy with Benjamin Netanyahu. This, I'm convinced, is not true. I think that Donald Trump actually loathes Benjamin Netanyahu, and we'll remember that when Joe Biden stole the elections in 2020, that Netanyahu was, if not the first, then among the very first statesmen who congratulated Joe Biden. And then in Joe Biden's administration, he had almost unlimited support, from Anthony Blinken and Jake Sullivan and the other neocons in the administration to do whatever he wanted. And we know that practically all of the ammunition, all of the bombs, all of the imported jet fuel that Israel needed to rain down death on the Palestinian people in Gaza were given with no strings attached by the American administration in Washington. There was that one pause, which really wasn't. They just had a temporary pause on one type of ammunitions that were not even so important, and they just made they just made a media narrative for the people for, oh look, we're imposing tough conditions on Netanyahu. He has to do what we say. So it was almost carte blanche. Do what you want to do. We're giving you all the support you need. Satellite imaging, targeting data, intelligence, covert presence of American specialists on the ground. And then not only that, but when the Ansarallah from Yemen started to target ships going through the Red Sea, the United States sent their navy to try to stop this. So that they tried to defend Israeli economy from Ansarallah. Anyway, before Donald Trump even came to power, he made Benjamin Netanyahu heel. And so it's going to be very, very tough. But I think that even supposing that Trump is a great BFF, friends forever with Netanyahu, that he's a diehard Zionist, completely devoted to Israel first, still there's not much that he can do for Israel. I think that ship has sailed a long time ago. I think that Israel has been strategically defeated in the Middle East, and that it's pretty much game over. The two-state solution is dead and buried, and that the only solution that's left is the one-state solution. And that one state, I don't know when and how it will be created, but it will inevitably have to be a state in which Christian Jews and Muslims live as equal peoples with equal rights, which means that it won't be Israel as it is today. It will be some other state. It will be a different state. Now, from a strategic point of view, what we have to appreciate that Israel was never created as a homeland for the long-suffering Jewish people. Israel was created as a beachhead of the Western Empire in the Middle Eastern region so that they can destabilize it, so that the Western financial and corporate interests could control Middle Eastern resources, particularly energy. And Israel absolutely served that function to perfection almost. And, in the West, people knew that Israel was American military brass was referring to Israel as their unsinkable aircraft carrier in the Middle East. That's the function it served. And this setup was already planned and created by the British Empire at the turn of the last century. So we're going back to the Balfour Declaration in 1917, which promised Israel as a homeland for the Jews. It was written by Arthur Balfour, who was British Foreign Secretary, to Lord Walter Rothschild, who was a scion of a banking dynasty that is still very much around. And Walter Rothschild's son Nathan was very, very close with Arthur Balfour. He practically lived at the Foreign Office, and so this Balfour Declaration was pretty much a friendly arrangement between them, and it was asked of the banking family to the Foreign Secretary, not issued by the Foreign Secretary because for some reason, he felt bad for the Jews because they were gonna, suffer in the World War 20 years later. The story is incoherent. It doesn't make any sense. But the Chatham House, the Milner's kindergarten group, as they called it, already back then, they were stating that it was necessary to seed the region with what they called is a particularly patriotic stock, and what they had in mind is Jews from Eastern Europe and other countries in the Middle East. So that's the plan that they created, and they set up Israel as this crisis flashpoint. The rabid dog that kept the whole region almost perpetually destabilized. And now you have new powers emerging on the Eurasian continent, namely Russia and China and Iran. And they are interested in a completely different security architecture on the continent. And so part of what they're doing is they want to eliminate this insecurity architecture created by the British Empire, which pretty much involved ceding the whole southern crescent of the Eurasian continent, from the Russia's western border, from the Baltics down to the Mediterranean, and then from the Mediterranean all the way across to the Koreas, with many of these beachheads, with these crisis flashpoints, so that the whole continent is almost constantly, perpetually at war, which enables then the Western Empire to always arbitrate between the warring parties, to lend them money, to sell them weapons, to help one against the other, and then the other against the other one, and always to say, well, okay, we'll help you, but your oil resources, we would like our corporations to develop that for you. You're going to have your cut, but we'd like BP and Shell and ExxonMobil to be present there, which then means, of course, that the funding of this development will always be down to the Western banks, right? Because BP and Shell and Chevron and so forth, they're going to take loans to develop those resources from RBS and JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs and these kinds of banks. Well, what that achieves is that it turns those countries' resources into collateral that is now under control of the Western banking establishments, which means that now, based on that collateral, which is somewhere else, they are suddenly acquiring these very profitable assets, because the Chevrons and BPs and Royal Dutch Shells of this world have to repay those loans to the banks that are funding that. So, they didn't wage war. They didn't drill for oil. They didn't refine it. They didn't ship it. They didn't distribute it. They did nothing at all. By a flick of a pen, they created a loan, and then suddenly billions and billions and billions of dollars accrued to them from assets that belong to somebody else, to a different country. So, like that's where the crux of the incentive lies. And this is who's always pushing for war. And this is the nexus of interest that asked for the Balfour Declaration, right? It was a banking family that demanded the Balfour Declaration. They couldn't care less about the Jews. They wanted that. They wanted the control of the Middle Eastern region because they knew it was very resource rich. Before oil was developed, the oil industry was whaling, right? They had to kill whales, they had to remove the fat from them, and then, turn it into oil. And now they discovered that there's oil underground, a different kind, but in much, much vastly larger quantities. So, that's the conflict. And it's clear what the Russians want, what the Iranians want, what the Chinese want. It's consistent with the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, with all these multipolar integrations. It's not clear to me that the people in the Trump administration understand this. But I think that in their contacts with the Russians and with the Chinese, they will be made to, this will be explained to them. But maybe they already do understand it. And then the American choice will be I regret that I forget who I heard this from, but they said the Americans have a choice of being a polite guest at the table at this global banquet, or they can be the thug that bosses everybody around. And I think that it is clear that at this point, being the global cop, having all these hundreds of military bases everywhere around the world is very, very costly. It's depleting the homeland. It's depleting the United States. Whereas you could have successful, profitable, mutually beneficial trade and good relations with other countries in the world. I kind of expect that Trump administration will go in that direction.
Very interesting, extremely thorough breakdown. Now, I do want to end the conversation here on YouTube. We're going to talk about one more topic over on Rumble. As many of the viewers know, I recently had a video banned by YouTube, removed. So certain topics I want to talk about, I'll take it to the Rumble platform. But for now, tell us about your Substack, Krainer Analytics, and anywhere else you'd like to direct people online.
Yeah, so, I'm easy to find on X. My handle is @NakedHedgie. For traders and investors, I publish a Substack called iSystem Trend Following, which is a daily CTA trend following newsletter covering 17 key global markets. And then I also publish a personal Substack that covers more, things of history and economics and stuff of more general interest. I publish about once a week, and that one is entirely free of charge, and it's called Alex Krainer Substack. So that's the three main platform that I use.
Great. Well, I'll put all those links in the description below. Go to Commodity Culture on Rumble. You can search us up here to hear the next topic of conversation. But for now, thank you so much, Alex, for coming on, and I'll see you over on Rumble.
Pleasure. Thank you.
And thank you for joining us today. If you're on YouTube, head to Rumble to watch the rest of this interview where we talk about things too controversial for the platform. If you're watching this on Rumble, the extra content will be on the channel, so please be sure to check it out. I know you're going to find it insightful, although it's very dark, so viewer discretion, of course, is advised. This episode was brought to you by ARC Silver Gold Osmium. For all your precious metals needs, head to arcsgo.com and contact owner Ian Everard today at 307-264-9441 or by email at ian@arcsgo.com, and make sure to tell him that Commodity Culture sent you. And I'll see you guys in the next episode. Commodity Culture is a series on commodities and natural resources. If you would like to see more, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you're always up to date with the latest episodes.